A strategy built on silence that changed everything. It wasn't announced. It wasn't documented. It was never officially approved in a meeting. And yet, over time, silence itself became the strategy, the unspoken rule that shaped decisions, behavior, and outcomes across the entire company. To understand why this story matters now, we have to return to a period when the organization was under pressure, but not yet in crisis. Performance was uneven. Competition was rising. Questions were forming just beneath the surface. But instead of confronting uncertainty, leadership chose a quieter path. They said less, asked fewer questions, encouraged alignment over debate. And slowly, a culture emerged where silence felt safer than truth. Our story begins with a subtle shift in meetings. Voices that once challenged assumptions grew quieter. Difficult questions were postponed or redirected. Reports softened their language. Risks were framed as opportunities. Not because people stopped seeing the problems, but because speaking about them stopped feeling useful. Feedback still existed. It simply learned how to stay invisible. The strategy wasn't written down, but everyone understood it. Avoid friction. Preserve momentum. Don't disrupt confidence. In an organization rewarded for stability, silence became a form of loyalty. Those who spoke carefully advanced. Those who spoke candidly stalled. Over time, this unspoken rule shaped who stayed, who left, and who led. What made the strategy so powerful was that it worked. At first, meetings ran smoothly. Decisions came faster. Leadership felt unified. From the outside, the company appeared disciplined and focused. But beneath that calm surface, something essential was being traded away. Information. Not the kind captured in dashboards or forecasts, but the kind carried by hesitation, dissent, and unease. Signals that never reached the top, because the system quietly trained them not to. No one realized yet that silence wasn't preventing disruption. It was delaying it. And when disruption finally arrived, it would arrive amplified by everything that had gone unspoken along the way. As silence settled in, it reshaped the company's internal rhythms. Meetings became shorter but thinner. Decisions were made faster, but with fewer perspectives. Leaders praised alignment, mistaking the absence of disagreement for clarity. The organization felt calmer, more controlled. And in times of uncertainty, that calm felt like progress. But beneath the surface, important conversations were disappearing. Middle managers learned to translate bad news into neutral language. Engineers stopped flagging edge cases that slowed delivery. Sales teams avoided sharing objections they heard repeatedly from customers, choosing instead to highlight deals that closed smoothly. No one was explicitly told to stay quiet. The system taught them that silence was efficient, and efficiency was rewarded. Over time, the effects compounded. Strategic reviews focused on what was measurable and safe. Risks that couldn't be quantified were excluded. Long-term concerns were deferred in favor of short-term wins. The company became excellent at executing known plans while slowly losing the ability to question whether those plans still made sense. Outside the organization, the world kept changing. Customers adapted faster than expected. New competitors experimented boldly. Technologies matured in directions no forecast had captured. But inside the company, those signals arrived muted, filtered through layers of reassurance. By the time leadership noticed shifts in behavior, they appeared fragmented and inconclusive, easy to dismiss. Silence also reshaped who stayed. Employees who thrived in ambiguity and debate grew frustrated. They raised concerns once, twice, then stopped. Some left quietly, citing better opportunities. Others stayed but disengaged, contributing only what was required. Meanwhile, those comfortable with alignment rose through the ranks, reinforcing the same patterns at higher levels. The strategy of silence had another unintended effect. It blurred responsibility. When no one challenged assumptions, no one truly owned outcomes. Decisions became collective enough to avoid blame, but distant enough to avoid accountability. Problems didn't belong to anyone until they became emergencies. And when emergencies did arise, they felt sudden, a missed market shift, a product that underperformed expectations, a competitor that moved faster than anyone predicted. Leadership reacted with surprise, asking how no one saw it coming. But many had seen it. They just hadn't said it. At least not in a way the system allowed to travel upward. The silence that once created calm was now creating confusion. Yet even then, the organization hesitated to change. Breaking silence meant introducing discomfort. It meant reopening debates that had been intentionally closed. It meant admitting that smooth meetings had come at a cost. And so the strategy persisted, not because it was effective anymore, but because no one had practiced speaking differently. What the company didn't realize was that silence doesn't eliminate risk. It concentrates it. And that concentration was about to reach a breaking point. The breaking point didn't arrive as a dramatic collapse. It arrived as confusion, a sequence of decisions that felt reasonable in isolation but disastrous together. A product launch that missed the mark, a market entry that stalled, a strategic bet that failed to deliver its promise. Each outcome prompted the same question from leadership. How did this happen? The answers, when they came, were unsettling. Postmortems revealed that warnings had existed at every stage. Engineers had flagged scalability risks early. Sales teams had heard consistent hesitation from customers. Analysts had noticed patterns that didn't align with optimistic projections. But each signal had been softened, delayed, or quietly set aside, not out of malice, but out of habit. The habit of silence had done its work too well. As pressure mounted, leadership demanded more transparency. They asked for honesty. They encouraged people to speak up. But the request collided with years of conditioning. Employees didn't know how to suddenly reverse behavior that had been rewarded for so long. Speaking candidly now felt risky. Trust had thinned. Silence had become muscle memory. The tension grew when a senior leader openly questioned why no one had escalated the issue sooner. The question landed poorly. For many, it felt unfair. They had raised concerns in the language the system permitted. They had followed the unspoken rules. Now, they were being asked to account for a failure created by those same rules. Departments retreated inward. Defensive explanations replaced collaboration. Meetings grew longer and more cautious. The calm efficiency once celebrated now gave way to hesitation and second-guessing. Silence no longer felt safe, but speaking still didn't feel safe either. The true conflict emerged here. The company didn't lack information. It lacked a way to hear it. Breaking the strategy of silence would require more than encouragement. It would require dismantling incentives, rewriting norms, and redefining what leadership meant. It would require accepting friction as a sign of health rather than a threat. And most importantly, it would require leaders to listen without punishing what they heard. Some executives understood this. Others resisted, clinging to the belief that better processes, not cultural change, would solve the problem. Task forces were formed. Reporting structures were adjusted. New tools were introduced. But without addressing the underlying silence, each fix felt cosmetic. Then came the moment that forced the issue. A cross-functional review uncovered a risk so significant it could no longer be reframed or delayed. It threatened a core revenue stream. It demanded immediate action. And for the first time in years, the conversation couldn't be smoothed over. People spoke, haltingly at first, then with growing clarity. They described what they had seen, what they had known, what they had chosen not to escalate. The room filled with uncomfortable truths. Not accusations, but realizations. The silence hadn't protected the company. It had isolated it from itself. And in that realization, the organization stood at a crossroads. It could double down on control, enforcing tighter messaging and stricter alignment. Or it could confront the harder task, learning how to speak again. The next decision would determine whether silence remained the strategy or became the lesson. The room changed the moment the truth was spoken aloud. Not dramatically, not emotionally, but unmistakably. The silence that once felt protective now felt exposed, its cost finally visible to everyone in the room. What leadership had mistaken for alignment was revealed as avoidance. What they had praised as efficiency was shown to be erosion. The risk uncovered in that review could not be managed quietly. It required decisive action, real trade-offs, and uncomfortable conversations with customers and partners. And for the first time in years, those conversations happened without polishing the message first. Leaders listened without interrupting. Teams spoke without softening. The exchange was messy. It was slow. And it was real. The company's response didn't come as a sweeping declaration. It came as a series of small but meaningful changes. Meetings were restructured to reward dissent instead of suppress it. Reviews were redesigned to surface uncertainty instead of bury it. Leaders learned to pause before responding, not to control the narrative, but to understand what they were hearing. Silence was no longer interpreted as agreement. The transition was not smooth. Some employees struggled to trust that honesty was truly safe. Some leaders struggled to hear criticism without defensiveness. A few chose to leave, uncomfortable in an environment where alignment no longer guaranteed advancement. But over time, something shifted. Information began moving upward again. Signals reached decision-makers before becoming crises. Strategy regained depth. The most striking change wasn't in performance metrics. It was in conversations. People asked harder questions. Disagreements surfaced earlier. Decisions slowed slightly, but improved dramatically. The company traded artificial calm for genuine clarity. Looking back, leadership recognized the irony. Silence had once felt like the responsible choice, a way to protect momentum, to avoid disruption. But the cost of that silence had been far greater than the discomfort of speaking. It had delayed learning, concentrated risk, and distorted reality. The strategy built on silence did change everything. It showed the company what happens when truth is filtered for too long, and it left behind a lesson that extends far beyond one organization. Cultures don't fail because people speak too much. They fail when people learn it's safer not to speak at all. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. A